Hello, everybody, and welcome back to part two of my Overwatch League 2019 end of season power rankings. If you did not see part one, you can go check that out either from the link in the description or in the cards. I will warn you, it's pretty long. I'm going to try to keep this one shorter, but we'll see what happens. Um, Obviously, as I mentioned before, I mentioned in the last one, I'll mention again in this one, these are my rankings, these are my opinions. The way that I may rank teams may be different than how you would rank teams. That's okay. I will explain as best as I can my reasonings for why I have them where I have them, while also trying not to spend too long doing it. So if you have any questions on why I have teams where I do, or you have whatever, any questions about anything, leave them in the comments down below. I would love to answer your questions and explain to you why I have teams where I have them, this kind of stuff. So that is that. But this is part two, obviously. As I mentioned, we will be going over teams 10 through 1 in this video. If you want to see teams 20 through 11, that would be where you watch part 1. But if you don't feel like watching part 1, you just want to watch part 2, here is a brief recap of where I had the teams from part 1. So for 20 was the Boston Uprising, 19 Toronto Defiant, 18 Dallas Fuel, 17 Houston Outlaws, 16 Paris Eternal, 15 Florida Mayhem, 14 Washington Justice, 13 Philadelphia Fusion, 12 Chengdu Hunters, and 11 Los Angeles Valiant. So that was 20 through 11 real quickly. So let's move on now and let's jump into number 10, where I have the Shanghai Dragons. Now, the Shanghai Dragons season record was 13 and 15 minus 10. They made the season play-in tournament, though they fell to the London Spitfire after beating the Philadelphia Fusion. They made the Stage 2 playoffs. They're the Stage 3 champions. And one of the things we've seen so far from them this offseason is that their head coach and assistant coaches left. That would be Blue Haas and Levi. And they promoted Moon from Team CC, who was the former head coach of the Los Angeles Valiant. Now, the reason why I have the Dragons here at 10 is because when we last saw them in the playoffs, they did not perform super well, but they beat what a lot of people had expected of them. Most people expected Philadelphia to win, and they did not. Shanghai managed to win pretty convincingly there, as well as they took London to 8 maps before falling, and it was a very close series, obviously. 8 maps is the longest series ever in the Overwatch League. Their Stage 4, of course, not very good, which is a big part of why they are this low, and they could have been lower, you could argue, but they did win Stage 3, which is a big win. And then, like I said, they made the season play-in tournament and managed to beat Philadelphia and also play a close series against London. So I think 10 is probably where they are. I think it took them a little bit of time to kind of get adjusted to what was going on. Whether or not that was the head coaching problem, we don't know. But like I said, they promoted Moon now, who was a former LA Valiant head coach. I'm not a huge fan of what Moon did in Season 2 for the Valiant at the very beginning in Stage 1, so we'll see how they do now with a new head coach. But overall, not super sold on that move, but that's what they did. That's my number 10. That's my reasoning for it. Let's move on to my number 9. Number 9, I have the London Spitfire, the team that eliminated the Shanghai Dragons from the season play-in tournament. London Spitfire on the season were 16 and 12 plus 6. They, of course, made the season playoffs as well as the play-in tournament. They made the Stage 2 playoffs. They were the Stage 2 Atlantic Division champions. The coaches, 815, who was their head coach, and Jay Field have left the team at the moment. They have not gotten a new head coach. And then they also have announced that they will not be re-signing Nuss, Birdring, or Guard. So 3 players have gone. Their coaching is gone for the most part. Huge changes here for the London Spitfire, which are maybe will help them going forward. But the reason why I have them at 9 is because when we saw them in the playoffs, they did not perform well. They took 1 map off New York. They took no maps off San Francisco. They barely scraped by Shanghai, who had been not playing its best before that. And at the end of the day, London just did not perform the way I think a lot of people expected. They left a bad taste in a lot of people's mouths. A lot of people predicted London to make grand finals. Some people, like I had them winning or making it to losers finals. They didn't perform the way people thought they would. Their problem, I think, was that they didn't have the flexibility at the DPS role that they hoped they would have between Birdring and Guard. Prophet obviously can do whatever he needs to do, but your other player needs to be able to perform well as well. And I don't think they had that. Nuss going is not that big of a deal. They have Quatermain, who by the end of the season was playing for the most part anyway, so the Spitfire are a good team. They make a couple changes. They'll be back in the running for a title. I just think that they didn't have what they needed in the playoffs, and that is why they ultimately fell to the San Francisco Shock and the New York Excelsior, and why they did not live up to the expectations a lot of people had for them. They're still a very good team. They need to add a couple more parts and a couple more pieces, but beyond that, they'll be fine. Coming in at number 8, I have the Guangzhou Charge. They finished the season 15-13 plus 4, and they, of course, made the season play-in tournament. And they had some late season roster additions that I think really helped them out as the season kind of progressed. Obviously, we know that they had Nero from the beginning of the season, but he couldn't play until he was 18. That didn't happen until late in the season. Nero was a huge playmaker for this team, one of the best players, I think, of the second half of the season, and I think he completely changed the course of the Guangzhou Charge this season. Plus, they added Bishu and Fraggy for some leadership, some veteran experience, and I think a lot of the things that people have mentioned is as teams start to travel more, we're going to probably see a lot more use of a lot of these teams' benches. Roster's going to get a lot deeper because they need to have these players that they can sub in after travel or during travel. So, like, if you're, if a team has to go from China to New York, for example, for a couple matches, you might not even take your whole team with you if you're going to be playing home the following week, or you may have kind of like two rosters. You may split how you're going to play them. You may just keep some people back and then have them fly out later or something like that. You never really know. But this is a team that made some additions late in the season. They looked very good in Stage 4. They looked pretty good against Seoul. Seoul just looked a lot better than a lot of people expected them to look when they came to the season play-in tournament. Guangzhou Charge is still a very good team. They're still a very solid team. I think they will be in a very good place going forward because they have, I think, a lot of the players that they need. They have a lot of talent. They have a surprisingly good team. They're a very young team as well, with some veteran leadership in there to help them out as well going forward. But they were a team that didn't have a ton of Overwatch League players at the start of the season. People from the 2018 season. They had Hotba, and that was it. But like I said, they added Fraggy, they added Bishu. You have some young players who are very good, like Nero, like Shu. This is a team that will be very good going forward. I have no doubt in my mind about that. This is a very good team, a team to watch out for. I think the Guangzhou Charge are going to be one of the most fun teams to watch going forward. They were a fun team to watch anyway, but they're going to be even more fun to watch when we see how they change and adapt with the changing format with the homestands and whatnot. But I like the Guangzhou Charge, and they're a good team. How about number 8? Next is number 7, where I have the Seoul Dynasty. 15-13 plus 14 for their season. They made the season playoffs. They made the season play-in tournament. They made Stage 1 playoffs. They made Stage 3 playoffs. This is a team with a lot of players on this team. They have, I believe, 11 players on the roster. Various different levels of free agency and signings for these players. What's interesting about Seoul, I think, is that they impressed me a lot more than I expected them to late in the season. Obviously, Stage 4, they got that win against the LA Valiant, which is pretty big. It kept the Valiant out of the playoffs. But we also saw them almost, I won't say almost beat, play very well against the Vancouver Titans in round 1 of the playoffs, which people did not expect. They didn't perform super well when they had to play against the Hangzhou Spark, but the Spark are a very good team. But they played very well against the Titans. I also think that the Seoul Dynasty played very well in the play-in tournament when they beat the Guangzhou Charge. I think they exceeded expectations when they made it to playoffs. And yes, they didn't win a game in the playoffs. So they won a game in the play-ins, but they didn't win a game in the playoffs. But you look at their overall record, right? 15-13 plus 14. They only won 2 more games than they lost, but they had a plus 14 map differential. That is better than a lot of other teams in the league. There are teams that they had a better differential than, that had a better record than they did. London only had a plus 6 differential. The Hangzhou Spark had a plus 12 differential, and they were 18-10. So the Seoul Dynasty had a very solid differential. They had a very solid season. I think they are a team that is about one or two really good superstar players away from being a competitor for the title. I had them at 5 in my preseason power rankings, and I still think that they could hit that mark if they get that one really good superstar player. And there's tons of players available for them, right? We know there's going to be a bunch of players who are available in free agency, or will likely be available that they can offer contracts to. A lot of these Korean players are going to clamor to play for the Seoul Dynasty because they're the Seoul Dynasty. They're the one team representing Korea. And if you can get a big player that's a free agent, like a Carpe or like a Meko maybe, you can really see how the Seoul Dynasty would really kind of propel themselves forward and be a really dominant force going forward. So this is a team I'm not worried about. I thought they exceeded expectations late in the season, and one or two really strong players away from being what they sought to be when they made this team, the Seoul Dynasty. Next is number 6, and I already know number 6 could be controversial for people, so I want to let people know right here, right now. My number 6, my number 5, and number 4, very close. Positions could move around any day based on how I'm feeling, but I'm going to explain why I have things where I have them, and I'm going to include a link in the description to a video when I'm talking about it that I think will help make my cause and my explanation known. But number 6, I have the Los Angeles Gladiators. Now, obviously, a lot of people are going to say, how do you have the Gladiators at 6? They finished season at 5. They won a game in the playoffs. And they were how do you have them at 6? Well, I'll tell you how I have them at 6. Yes, their season record was 17-11, plus 19 differential. Solid differential. They made Stage 2 playoffs. They made the season playoffs. But there's some issues that I think the Gladiators have that I think was evident throughout the season, and it happened in the playoffs as well. And it had to do with the way that their play style worked, right? They would come into each meta, right, with a very unique play style, right? They'd do something differently than other people would do. So when you get into your first match, your second match, people haven't quite figured it out yet most of the time, so they can get a good win against teams. They can, steal a win, whatnot, stuff like that. We saw them beat the Hangzhou Spark in the playoffs before dropping their next 2 matches to Vancouver and to San Francisco. And they did so in pretty miserable fashion. They didn't look very good when they played against Vancouver or San Francisco. But what's interesting about this team, and we saw it in the match against the Hangzhou Spark, is that teams figure their stuff out pretty quickly. And once they get figured out, it's a problem. And they start to struggle. Sideshow on the Overwatch League stream, when they were talking about the match between the Gladiators and the Spark, mentioned how the Gladiators would play. And they would play with very aggressive tank play, right? And the Hangzhou Spark struggled to beat it for the first several maps, but they figured it out. And once they figured it out, the Gladiators were not winning that series, and they only managed to win, of course, when they got to the control maps, the final control map. But it was a series that went the distance, right? So the Gladiators' play style did not really get them very far because people figured it out, and as soon as they figured it out, they struggled to be able to keep it up. Now, granted, they lost to Vancouver and they lost to San Francisco, the 2 teams who eventually made it to the grand finals. So, that changes things, but that was the Gladiators were dealing with. They're not the best team in the league in terms of doing stuff like that. Now, Deepe, who is their head coach, who's a very well-regarded head coach, he's a very good head coach, he's done a lot of really great things, has his contract with the Gladiators has expired. Now, that doesn't mean he's going to leave. It's going to basically say that he can leave, but he's going to explore other options, see what he thinks is the best option, and then he will maybe return to the Gladiators, or he might go somewhere else. We don't know yet. But the Gladiators, to me, I have them at 6 because of that predictability that they ended up showing. Teams figured them out, and when teams figured them out, the Gladiators did not look very strong. Once their style was figured out, teams they didn't look very strong. Now that happens a lot. There are a lot of teams who once their style's figured out, teams counter them, and they're hard to kind of start to beat that once you start struggling. But a lot of teams will get figured out and will basically use just how good they are, and they'll just win because of how good of a team they are. The Gladiators were not really able to do that late in the season as the season progressed, and that's why I believe that they fell as much as they did in the season playoffs. I don't think they improved throughout the season playoffs. Now, granted, Like I said, they played Vancouver and San Francisco. It's hard to improve and to play those two teams, but that's really where I look at what the Gladiators' season was. They were a good team throughout the season. They had some very strong looks, but ultimately, I think they fell flat uh, in the later half of the season. They won games they needed to win, but they never really won them super impressively or impressively, and that's why I have them at 6. Number 5, I have the Atlanta Reign. The Atlanta Reign finished the season 16-12 plus 19. They, of course, made the season playoffs. They made the Stage 1 playoffs. They were the only team to take a map off the San Francisco Shock during the season playoffs, and they beat the San Francisco Shock in the season playoffs, knocking them down to the losers bracket. So the Atlanta Reign had a very strong look in the season playoffs, especially. Gator on the Sigma was a very, very good pick. He was a very good player on the Sigma. I thought the Reign looked very good against the San Francisco Shock. And the Reign are a team that I think going forward are going to be pretty dangerous. They never really had like something that they would kind of be defined by, I don't think. I think they just played very, very well. They played a style that was very good. San Francisco said, throughout the whole playoffs that they already knew that Atlanta Reign was going to be the toughest team that they played. They played them tough every time they played them. Of course, they beat New York twice in the regular season. The Atlanta Reign are a very good team, right? So you look at the Atlanta Reign going forward, they have a lot of good players. They have one of the best academy teams in the country, or in the world, in the ATL Academy. We could see a lot of players from ATL Academy get promoted to the full roster. Maybe not. We'll see what happens going forward. But this is a team that I think going forward is in a really good position. They have some really good players. They're an international roster, so they have figured that out. So they can bring in some players from different parts of the world. They're not limited to North America and Europe or Korea or whatnot. Probably can't bring in any Chinese players because they'd have to have experience on international rosters. Not many of those, if any. I guess the one you'd have, the best chance with is Dia or someone from the Shanghai Dragons from last season. But in general, you don't really have the option to bring in a lot of Chinese players. But the Atlanta Reign, that's beside the point. They're in a very good position. They add one or two good players. Their coaching staff did a very good job. This is a team that could compete. They're in a division next year that isn't super strong. They're with the Washington Justice, the Florida Mayhem, Houston Outlaws, and Philadelphia Fusion. That division should be the Atlanta Reigns more than anybody else's. So, really, I think this is a team that looks very good, looks like they have a really good shot at winning the whole thing if they keep improving. And I think that's really where I am with the Atlanta Reigns. They're a very good team. I'm really excited to see what they do going forward. I'm really happy with the way the Atlanta Reign played late in the season. I thought they looked very good. I think that they will be a dominant team going forward. They're going to be one of the Atlantic juggernauts, like we saw with New York for the past 2 seasons. They were kind of this big team in the Atlantic. I think the Atlanta Reign are going to really challenge New York for that spot as the best team in the Atlantic Division, or the Atlantic Conference, I guess, now going forward. Next, my number 4 team, which I'm sure you guys can figure out now, it is the Hangzhou Spark. Hangzhou Spark finished the season with an 18-10 plus 12 record. They made the season playoffs, they made the Stage 2 playoffs, they made the Stage 3 playoffs. This is a very good team, the Hangzhou Spark. They really were. They were a very impressive team. They obviously took some time to get going. In the season playoffs, of course, we saw them fall to the LA Gladiators. Very close series, as I mentioned before. But we saw them beat the Atlanta Reign with ease. They completely dismantled the Atlanta Reign like it was nothing. And then, of course, they struggled against the San Francisco Shock, but that is what you kind of expect from the Hangzhou Spark. They beat the Seoul Dynasty, they beat the Atlanta Reign, and they struggled against the San Francisco Shock. But everybody struggled against the San Francisco Shock. You can't really use that against anybody. I know I said that about the Gladiators, but you can't really use that against anybody. It's more about how you play against the team and how good you look. And the Spark looked good against Atlanta. They looked good against Seoul. Yes, they lost to the Gladiators, but they still looked good against the Gladiators. They didn't really have a super weak match except for the one against San Francisco. The Spark have some really good players, some really talented players. Gouchway, of course, MVP candidate. very good player. One of the best players in the league, in my opinion. One of the most fun players to watch in the league. The Chinese World Cup team will be really fun to watch because Gushue is going to be playing. I really like the Spark, what they've done. The team they've built is really good and really fun and entertaining to watch. I'm interested to see where they go going forward, kind of if they make any big moves. I'd assume every team, pretty much, with the exception of maybe San Francisco and Vancouver, make some big moves in the offseason and try to add some nice superstar players. But I don't really know what the Hangzhou Sparks' needs are. I'd say if they can bring in a really good DPS player, that would probably help them out. I thought their support line was very good. I thought their tank line was very good. I thought their damage players were solid. But if you can bring in a superstar, I've mentioned Carpe already once before. If you can bring in a Carpe, I think that would be really useful for this team going forward, and I think that would be a huge thing that would boost them into the top, potentially being a top 3 team. And their division isn't the toughest division in the league. There's 2 divisions, obviously, in the Pacific. You have the North American Pacific Division, essentially, and you have the Asian Pacific Division. So Hangzhou is with Seoul, Chengdu, Guangzhou, Shanghai, and that's a winnable division. It's going to be a bit of a tough division. The lowest I have ranked a team in that division is 12, so it's going to be a tough division. But Hangzhou, to me, was the best team in that division for most of the season. I don't see why that would change with the way that they've been playing. I really like the Spark. I think they're a good team. So that's my thoughts on the Spark. Really solid team. Very interested to see how they do going forward. It'll be fun to watch. Moving on to number 3, we have the New York Excelsior, who finished the season with a 22-6 plus 40 record. They were the season Atlantic Division champions. They made the season playoffs, of course, making it to the winners finals and then losing in the losers finals. They made the Stage 1 playoffs. They made the Stage 2 playoffs. They made the Stage 3 playoffs. They were the Stage 1 Atlantic Division winner and the Stage 3 Atlantic Division winner. So this is a top-tier team we're talking about here. A team that was very good throughout the season. In Stage 3, they were the number 1 team in the stage. The only team to make every single stage playoffs ever in the Overwatch League. They didn't make any stage finals, unfortunately, in the 2019 season. So that streak of making every stage finals did not last from the 2018 season. But this is a team that was a top-tier team throughout the season. Yes, they played in the weaker division, but what we saw from them in the playoffs was that they really were that good, though. We saw them beat the London Spitfire with ease. They beat the Atlanta Reign pretty easily. And where they fell was against the Vancouver Titans. It was a very good series. It could have gone NYXL's way. They looked very, very good. And they actually looked pretty good against San Francisco. I think of all the matches that San Francisco played in the losers bracket, and I'm including the grand finals in this. The match against New York was the best looking match, or the hardest fought match for the San Francisco Shock. That doesn't include the match against the Atlanta Reign. Obviously, that one was very tough. They lost that match. I think the New York Excelsior pushed the San Francisco the hardest of all the teams in the losers bracket, but they ultimately, of course, fell and could not get the victory. But it was a solid performance from them. I don't expect a lot of roster changes to happen. I expect maybe 1 or 2 big signings to be their move going forward, bring in a couple players. I think that they probably should look to bolster their tank line a little more to give it a little more flexibility, specifically in the off-tank role. And I think they should look to bring in another support player, whether it be main or flex, preferably main. You don't really need a flex support when you have Jonak. But I think that's really what they need to do to bolster this team a little bit more. They have plenty of damage dealers. It doesn't look like they're going to actually get rid of any of them, which I expected them to. Get rid of probably Pine and maybe Flower. But the way that they kind of progressed throughout the season and the later part of the season, and some of the comments they've made about Pine and the reason why I didn't play a lot this season makes a lot of sense why we didn't see him. But it seems like he still wants to play. He still wants to play with New York. New York still wants to keep him around, at least from what I can tell. So it's interesting to see. But this is a team that played very well throughout the season. 22-6 record. That's not a record to laugh at. They obviously never were able to beat Vancouver. They were only able to beat San Francisco back in Stage 1 when San Francisco was at its weakest. But yes, they got forward by San Francisco, but they looked pretty good against them. There were several times where they came very close to winning maps, or maybe should have won the maps, but San Francisco clutched it out, did San Francisco things. But the NYXL, very good team. Not a lot to say about it. They're definitely better than the rest, but they're not as good as the top two teams in the league. That's really where they sat for pretty much the entire season. At stage 4, they struggled a little bit, but I think their performance in playoffs showed that they weren't really caring about the stage 4 results that much and focused mainly on the season playoffs, and it showed, and they looked very good, but they ultimately just couldn't get the wins where they needed them at the end of the day. So that's why I have them at number 3. Number 2, I have the Vancouver Titans. Not a big surprise to a lot of people, I'm sure. They finished the season with a 25-3 plus 61 record. They were the overall Pacific Division champions, which is a pretty big deal. Runner-up in the grand finals. They were the Stage 1 champion, the Stage 2 playoffs appearance there, Stage 3 playoff appearance, and they were the Stage 1 and Stage 3 Pacific Division winners. So a lot of really good stuff in the Vancouver Titans throughout the season. They looked like the team to beat when the season began, but obviously as the season went on, we saw that they were not probably going to be the team to beat. They did make the grand finals, did not win a map when they got there, but San Francisco is San Francisco. They do San Francisco things. It's not easy to beat them. Vancouver Titans, though, very good team. Very, very good team. Like I said, there's not a lot they need to change. I don't really need to explain a lot about this team. This is a team that is what they are. You know what you're getting with the Vancouver Titans. You know what you're seeing with the Vancouver Titans. They're a very good team from Runaway. They maybe bring up a couple players from Runaway. We know Runaway's getting some looks. Teams are looking at them. But ultimately, I don't think the Vancouver Titans have to change a lot. I think the addition of Tizzy was very good. He is a much more flexible main tank than what Bumper is. Bumper's Orisa was never that impressive. I think Tizzy looked better on the Orisa. Obviously, we saw Tizzy throughout the entirety of the season playoffs, so it makes sense that we saw Tizzy playing there. And I think the Vancouver Titans, they're a good team. They're a very good team, obviously. They made the grand finals, but ultimately I think their shortcomings were really just that they didn't have that same oomph and that same kind of raw strength and clutch potential that we saw from San Francisco. And Vancouver had clutch potential, but late in the season I just think they started to lose that clutch potential. And I think we saw their peak a little too early. I think that was a big part of their problem. They peaked in Stage 1, I think. And they basically, and that's something they said. They said after Stage 1 that they weren't focusing anymore on the stage playoffs. They were focusing on the season playoffs. But at the end of the day, that was their peak anyway, and they fell apart. And by the end of the season, it was not them who were the champions. So they had a good season. There's nothing to scoff at with them. They will definitely be title contenders going forward, but you have to give it up to the San Francisco Shock for being able to beat a team that for most of the season was pretty much untouchable, except for, they were the first team to beat the Vancouver Titans back in Stage 2 finals, and then they beat them again in Stage 4. They beat them again in the grand finals. So, we got what we expected from that matchup at the end of the day. The San Francisco Shock versus the Vancouver Titans being a pretty solid rivalry, but ultimately it was the San Francisco Shock who won it all in the end. And finally, let's talk about our number 1 team in the power rankings, the one that everybody's going to put at number 1 because they were the best team in the league. That's the San Francisco Shock, everybody. 23-5 record overall with a plus 66 differential, which is incredible. They are, of course, your 2019 Overwatch League champions. They made Stage 1 playoffs. They were the Stage 2 champions. They made the Stage 3 playoffs. They were the Stage 2 Pacific Division winners. They had the golden stage where they won 28 maps in a stage, which is every map. Then they lost in a couple maps in stage playoffs, but still. And then they were undefeated when they made it into the losers bracket in the season playoffs. They lost to the Atlanta Reign and then won every map after that. That kind of stuff doesn't happen. The San Francisco Shock are an incredible team. They have incredible depth in their roster. They have backups in pretty much every position except for their support. They don't have a backup flex or backup main support. They don't really need them, though, because their supports are really, really good. They have 4 really good damage dealers in Architect, Rascal, Sinatra, and Striker. They have Super and Smurf, who are very good tanks. They have Chohyobin and Nevix, who are both really good off tanks. I don't really expect Nevix to stay with the team, though, going forward. I think he will most likely be not re-signed because he didn't really get a lot of play time, and you don't really need him. But maybe they'll re-sign him. We'll see. This team is full of talent at every spot. This is one of the best teams in the league ever, I think. I think they're better than what we saw from any of the 2018 teams. The San Francisco Shock were that good. They were that dominant. They were such a solid team throughout. And I think you have to really look at how good this team was. And you have to give credit to the coaching staff. You have to give credit to the organization. They built this team back in 2018 with the expectation that they could win in 2019. They built for the future, and it worked. This is a team I expect to be really good next season as well. Um, I wouldn't be surprised if they repeat champions. They're that good. This team has that much talent. They're that deep. There's nothing that you can be said about this team that is bad. They are such a good team. I have no words to describe how good they were in the 2019 season. They get the number one spot in the power rankings. I don't think anybody's going to disagree with that. And that is my opinion right there. So those are my full power rankings now. Here is a look at the full list if you just want to look at them at the end while I'm wrapping this video up. But that's everything I got for you. If you enjoyed, please consider liking and subscribing. Comment down below your thoughts on the power rankings if you want any more explanation for why I have teams where I have them, or you disagree, or you want to put your own rankings, whatever. I really like comments. I like reading what people have to say. As long as they're not really rude, mean comments, I'll read them and probably reply to them as well. So thank you so much for all of your support throughout the 2019 season. This officially concludes the 2019 videos for the Fan Thoughts and Analysis series, but the 2020 videos are just around the corner. They're coming up soon. So that's all I've got for you this week for the power rankings. So thank you once again. I will see you all in the next video. Hope you all have a wonderful day, and I will see you all later. Bye-bye.